We are very excited to host this series, and Akshay will tell you more about it later. IDN was established last year in Zagreb. It is a collective of organizations, activists, researchers, and artists, and we all of us are coming together to promote and strategize for the degrowth movement. We are specifically focused on cooperation, amplifying diverse narratives, public awareness, community building, and implementation of degrowth strategies. This particular event is hosted by the Global South Circle, of which me, Aya, Joel, Akshay are part of. And it is centered on being a bridge between the degrowth movement and the Global South so that we can build a true allyship between the two. A little bit of introduction here. I'm Kanika. I'm from India, and I've been working in the field of climate communication and education for last few years. And I was one of the founding members of IDN, and right now I'm part of the Global South as well as the Communications Circle. I'm particularly interested in figuring out strategies to talk about degrowth and post-development ideas, specifically in India, and just increase awareness around it. I will pass it to my co-moderator for today's session, Akshay.
Namaste, I'm Akshay. I'm from India as well, and thank you for joining us here for this critical discussion. Just wanted to introduce myself formally. I'm a campaigner based in India, and in my life, I've worked on several campaigns, advocacy, and research initiatives. Particularly, I have worked on combating wealth inequality and improving public services and its implications on human rights. I'm here as a member of Global South Circle at IDN. Before we go ahead, I have a little bit of a personal message. I would like to take a moment for all of us to acknowledge the Palestinian and Lebanese people who have been facing brutal genocide, forced starvation, displacement, and dehumanization. It's been more than 1 year actually of this genocide, 1 year of brutality, 1 year of heartbreaking violence, which we witness now every day on our screens. Uh, this has shattered our realities and sometimes also faith in the international system. Uh, we are now seeing more and more land and people are being targeted, but we have also witnessed solidarity for Palestinian people and the Palestinian liberation around the world. It is important to contextualize this violence as COP is going on. The world leaders are together discussing climate. The climate crisis is not separate from the genocide which is unfolding in front of our eyes. It seems like everyone is complaining that there is very less money for these things, but there is enough money for destruction. Clearly, billions are being put into the military aid of the Zionists, but it takes so much discussion and back and forth just to get enough on the loss and damage fund. The struggle for justice will continue, and we need to keep the hope on, sending our thoughts to Lebanon, Palestine, Congo, Sudan, and oppressed people all over the world. Over to Kanika.
Thank you so much for that, Akshay. There are some guidelines regarding participation in this call. Please keep your mics on mute while somebody else, the speaker or the hosts, are speaking. We will have a lot of time in the end for all of the questions. And we also request you to post your questions in the chat box if you have any during the session. And or you can also directly ask the panelist once the presentation is over. And if possible, please keep your cameras on. We would love to see your lovely faces. And in case you have connectivity issues, it's okay to keep your cameras off. Lastly, this is a safe space, and we would request everybody to keep it like that. With that, Akshay, do you want to tell everyone why we started this series, what it's about, a little bit of context on that?
Yes, definitely. As I said in my message as well, we are living on a planet which is almost on fire by the rich and powerful. And it's not easy for all of us to witness this extinction every day, the violence every day in our communities, in our villages, ancestral lands, schools, and hospitals, even now. There is this continuous necessity to feed the capitalist beast for their growth, and it's the growth politics is just everywhere, and it is making our planet more sick, thirsty, and hungry. We are here to talk about new approach, which needs global majority and global South at its center. Without their support, solidarity, and leadership from the South, I don't think degrowth movement can achieve its own purpose. Therefore, we are hosting these discussions to bring together a lot of voices from the global South to share their perspectives on degrowth, how we can learn and unlearn in delivering justice through degrowth, maybe it is social justice, climate justice, gender, or economics. This platform is a two-way exercise, so we want you to also interact with us, suggest us what kind of movements we can talk to, what kinds of movements we can learn from. So for people, audiences, and speakers, this is all about learning what degrowth can offer for social justice and also vice versa. With this, I hand it over to Kanika to start the discussion.
Thank you so much, Akshay. First, I would like to introduce our speaker for today. We have with us Dr. Vandana. She is an assistant professor at the OP Jindal Global University in Sonipat, India. She holds a PhD in public policy and management from the Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. She has extensive experience working in multi stakeholder context, including government, non government, market actors, and communities as part of her doctoral work and as a development professional. Her teaching and research expertise lies in political ecology with a focus on malnutrition, sustainable development, and indigenous knowledge, ESG, and environmental governance and post growth thinking. It's such a great pleasure to have you here with us, Vandana. On our last Beyond Degrowth series, we had Emilia Reyes, and she touched on the importance of the degrowthers moving from what she referred to as sardo activism, which means like retreating in the eco villages to actually engaging instead in the hard but necessary work of challenging the global power structures through multilateral processes. So, could you help us understand the dynamics at play, especially in the development and growth debate? What are some of the key tensions that you have witnessed in these debate in your work, and how can degrowth play a role in advancing it or breaking the development myth? The floor is yours.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kanika, Akshay, and Joel for organizing this. I'm extremely thrilled to be here with you guys. And thank you for your message of solidarity for the Palestinian and Lebanon people. I mean, it's indeed very important that we talk about these issues, and I'm really thankful that we're trying to build this solidarity network. Also, thank you to all the participants who've joined. I do recognize some names, and I'm glad that I could actually, I think some of you have met in the conference this year in Pontevedra. So yeah, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. And, I would actually start by, answering or responding to some extent to what Kanika and Akshay, has created the context. And my own engagement with the whole idea of degrowth or post-growth thinking began during my PhD days. And this is something, and I will, of course, put out my embeddedness, my own positionality as an Indian working in India, trained in a management school, having to deal with, mainstream economic thought. And there's some of the tensions that personally what I have felt, and I would be happy to, know about all the other struggles, discursive and in practice that people who are present here do face in your own context. Is this whole tension between the cost that we need to pay for development, for development goals. I mean, growing up, we have heard that, someone has to pay the cost for modernizing, right? And it has, historically, it has been people from the marginalized communities, be it women, be it Adivasis, be it Dalits. So the question now is, till how long and what should be the cost? As we speak here today, and I am located in Delhi, NCR region, which is the National Capital Region, which includes the other districts close to Delhi. And we have a very, toxic level of air pollution at the moment. And, there is already some conversation that's going on that what is the cost of development. So if you ask me some of the tensions that I have felt when it comes to, even when it comes to, sustainable development goals, or all of the development activities that we need. Of course, those are the objectives that we have to meet, be it poverty, be it increasing the energy or meeting the energy needs of a large majority of people in our country, or even providing them food. However, the path is something that, even as my own experience as a development practitioner and in my PhD work, is something that has pushed me a lot to think as to how do we meet these goals. Is it so in my own work, is it about the tension was about just feeding people versus how are we actually bringing the food to the plates of the people? What are we doing? So that is one tension, and the one which, of course, I will be and I would want to highlight in this discussion is this tension between development and environment. And I would want to argue, that this is an artificial trade-off. And I would really look forward to your comments. So, of course, that is a very important, that's a tension that I have been struggling with. How do I talk about degrowth and post-development thought? Because a lot of times, in my own circle of friends and colleagues and other people that I work with, the perception is that degrowth is a Western concept, right? And therefore, that is something, again, that I would want all of us here to, contribute to this discussion, that it is the roots of degrowth thought and the philosophical underpinnings, in fact, because degrowth, the understanding that it's just cutting down of consumption is a very, superficial or a myopic understanding of degrowth. So the philosophical underpinnings come from a lot of thinkers and communities of the global South, right? So at least these two are the things that I would want to, start with, and I would want your contributions and thoughts as well as we go forward. So if it's okay, then probably we can, share the question that we had, especially this particular tension, and we could just have some people share their thoughts about what they feel about the tensions that we experience in our everyday life. Kanika, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Do you want me to open the Mentimeter questions for everyone now?
Maybe we can first show the questions on the slide, and then maybe the Mentimeter is
Of
something we can do.
Of course. Akshay, can you show the slides and then I'll move to the Mentimeter?
Okay. The slides which Vandana shared, right?
Yeah, just the single one, which just has the question. And it's the other one, yes. Yes, so we have, I think there is a Mentimeter, scan code, which is being prepared. And if it would be great if you could just, participate and help us know how many of us here, struggle to talk about degrowth, post-growth, or post-development ideas beyond our circles, in our everyday lives, in our activism, or in our classrooms, or with our colleagues, or in any other, social, cultural, political concept, maybe in neighbors, maybe in family, right? When people really don't, if at all it is a struggle, and then what kind of arguments do you, are you, confronted with? So those are the two things that would be great if you could know.
I request everyone to go to menti.com and use this code to access this poll.
I have put it in the chat as well. If you have problem accessing Menti, you can put your inputs in the chat as well.
Vandana, would you like to comment on the results before I move on to the next slide?
I'm seeing the majority is that we do struggle a lot to talk about post-development in the developing country context, and that is precisely why it's important that we know that we actually understand what are the arguments against, and then how do we actually address those arguments, and what are the future or alternative visions that what are the possibilities. Actually, those are things that we can actually talk about in this, and I'm glad that the response is the way it is. Of course, it's a sad reality, but then it's great that we are here in one place together to actually think about this and talk about this.
Yeah, precisely. So as Vandana said, the next question here is, what arguments are you usually confronted with when you speak about degrowth and post-development in the context of Global South? We would love to hear what are some of the common arguments or misconceptions that you've come across.
Yeah, so the poverty question is something which is extremely prominent. It's very difficult to, that's a difficult argument. You still have people to grow and to develop. Yes, of course. The countries in Global South must follow the path of Global North development before thinking about degrowth. Yes, precisely. These are things. I am really glad with the responses. Thank you for sharing this. Employment generation issue is something that, of course, I do touch upon. We need to develop first. Sustainable growth and conservation can wait. Yes. But people need jobs. Yes, so jobs, employment, poverty, of course, a very important question. And, sometimes it's difficult. The perception becomes, and this is also a personal struggle, the perception becomes at the moment you talk about degrowth, you're either perceived as someone who is romanticizing poverty, or who is or who wants to go back in the path necessarily, because these degrowth and growth-led development are seen as opposites or antithesis of each other, but that is not exactly true. Why degrowth when we are underdeveloped? Yes, so who called us underdeveloped? It's again a question to be thought about. Investors are always looking for growth, hence it's not possible, right? Yes, maybe that's a different conversation. Necessary growth in health, education, and public sector for welfare. Yes, important, very important, but in the neoliberal version of capitalism where welfare has declined. I'm all for welfare, of course, but then we also have to look at the realities of health and education infrastructure in our current national context. It's utopic, backwards, and needs to move forward. Yes, precisely, this is forward, and I would want to share why it is moving forward. This is exactly one of, I mean, most of the times I get this response that, oh, you are like romanticizing, you want to live in nostalgia, but that is not true. It's unfair to even think about it because developed countries were allowed to grow. Developing countries have urgent needs in any case. Developing countries do not pollute that much. Yes. And therefore, I do touch upon in today's session, in this webinar, we talk about carbon inequality. And that is my first, and that is where I would want to, take it very slow and try to understand. And of course, we can have a conversation how it is still, it's not very unfair to talk about it in the developing country context. That it affects the vulnerable the most. Degrowth has no structure, framework, repair. Okay. It affects the vulnerable the most. So degrowth is affecting the vulnerable. Okay, this is okay, right. So these are arguments. Very interesting. Geopolitical challenges, you need strength for peace. India also showed the path of non-violence for peace to the entire world. Yes, national security is paramount. Okay, yes, that is something that I also hear a lot. It is our innate nature to grow. Yes, it is our innate nature to grow, but not always in the material sense, right? And that is something, what is growth? Growth can also be very intellectual or philosophical or spiritual, right? It need not just be in terms of material consumption. So growth, yes, but what should be the nature of growth is again something that needs to be broken down. Yes, are we getting more responses? So we have 24.
I think we've saturated.
It's saturated? Okay, great. World Development Bank Economist says that we need to copy the developed nations. Yes, which sounded absurd. Yes, it is indeed absurd. I am very excited now to show and start this conversation with whatever I could put together, whatever facts, whatever ideas I could put together. And of course, I am happy to take breaks. And please put your, comments or suggestions or whatever ideas on the chat, or of course you can raise your hand and feel free to stop me in case you feel it's very urgent for to take that question during the session. Right. So, all right. So, so we already have set the floor for this particular discussion, and I am very thrilled the way we have set it. To be provocative, and on purpose I'm being provocative, is that the whole development, just like growth in a infinite growth in a finite planet is a fairy tale. In my experience, the development, the way it is being delivered to us, and also the vision of development seems like a myth, right? So what I would want to do, a couple of things here, is to actually push or nudge to think about what our aspirations should be, where should we be going, and how we should be going, right? And what is the cost that we are ready to pay as society. Can we go to the next slide, Akshay, please? Right. So India, given my embeddedness in the Indian context, it is my limitation that I am well informed about my national context, and that has been my research, that has been my teaching, that has been my development sector work in the past, and I'm sure this is something that is going to resonate with cultures across the across the global south is that there are multiple cultures within that is subsumed within a national context. So India is a world of many worlds, right? So if we say, so if at all there is a linear path of development, people are stuck at different stages and in the current time period. It's not that, so if you visit places, you will, even in the current year of 2024, you would still feel that, oh my God, I've gone back to pre-colonial times or colonial times. So yeah, so it's a very diverse country. And therefore it is important. So the beauty is that it is a diverse nation and it still holds its integrity as a nation. And yet the complexity is that we have to, when it comes to policy, when it comes to activism, when it comes to even creating educational content, we have to be sensitive about these diversities and, customize it to the kind of audience that we are pitching in. So it has to be a very diverse set of interventions as well, right? So moving on, please. Yes. So the first thing first, when we have to, when we are confronted with this particular argument that, degrowth is for the West and it will be unfair on the developing world if we are told to degrow. Now, first of all, that will mostly, and in my experience, trust me, it will mostly come, and always, in fact, come from people who have not engaged with the literature or with the writings of degrowth or post-growth, right? So, in fact, development as the word was first time used in the presidential address by in the post-World War II world, right, by President Harry Truman, right, which led to the division of the world into two parts, right? That this is the developed world and this is the underdeveloped world, right? So we didn't really have the vocabulary of that this is underdeveloped, and once that vocabulary is created, then we start, thinking about it, and then we start looking at the world in those parameters, in those indicators, and a lot of times it kind of gets internalized in the way we think about things, in our rationality, in our subjectivity, right? So it's not, first of all, degrowth is not something that only originated from the West. And the second thing, it is not something which we are just talking about in the past 10 years, right? So the critics of development and the criticism of development and also alternative ways of nation building is something that has always been there in our country, right? So specifically in the 1970s and 80s, there is this whole there was a surge of thinkers and writers who had started questioning the linear unidirectional material and financial growth driven by commodification and capital markets. And this is also the time when the whole idea of sustainable development was being thought about and coined at the international level, right? So we do have a lot of scholars from the global south, and I have highlighted here specifically Ashish Nandi and Shiv Vishwanathan, who have been writing a lot about the violence that is inherent in the process of development. The structural violence which creates the structural conditions which create poverty is something that gets ignored in the conversation of poverty. And then there is something called, and then of course the clash of knowledge systems is again something which also has come from the critics of development, in the 80s and the 90s, right? So we can change the slide. Yes. So so I have always tried to go back and forth, so a little bit of history and then coming to the current realities. So as I mentioned earlier, as we speak and we talk about post-development and rethinking about the development path, but where to go and how to go, Where I am currently connecting with you, the AQI level has crossed 300. The water, as the water pollution, of course, has been in the news for the past 1 month, and the air is now toxic to breathe. People are wearing masks. The government has finally, imposed anti-pollution measures, right? And this is from the Supreme Court that was in the news today, that please do not relax these anti-pollution curves. And why did we even wait for it to cross 300? Why is this kind of an inaction, right? Right. So this is the morning news, the 799 that you see. So the left is from Delhi, and then the right picture. This was one of my colleagues who had posted it on the group, that the AQI was above 700, and now someone in the chat is mentioning that's above 1,000, right? So yes, I think it is pertinent to actually think about what are we doing in our cities, and how else can we rebuild the way in which we have envisioned city lives, right? So yes, we can go forward. Right. So I just thought that to start the discussion, we could, 1,000 is the maximum that we can measure. Just to, the first thing first that needs to be dealt with is the philosophical underpinnings of post-development and degrowth, right? So if we look at India, there have been many, thinkers, critical thinkers and philosophers in the past. And this is also, there are conversations during the freedom struggle as well, right? That how do you build the nation? How do we revive the rural? How do we emancipate the women? Or how do we, do the land reforms for that matter? Or what could be the path of non-violence? Or how do we do away with the systemic caste injustice, right? And then there have been, women at the forefront of environmental movement. The picture that you see on the screen of Chipko movement is something which is internationally recognized. I mean, I was in classrooms in Europe, and students even there recognize this particular picture. So the point here is that just because I am initiating these thinkers doesn't mean necessarily to go back or romanticize the past, but it's important that we also get inspired, and there is always something to learn from these thinkers, so Tagore and Gandhi, and it's not that there were no tensions among these thinkers. However, there is so much that probably we have missed out in our current, social and policy formation. And therefore, I thought I will start by using or trying to nudge the audience to think about or revisit these thinkers. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes. And I would, I have deliberately chosen two which are more contemporary. I would want to actually bring in two things, and that is something that I, connect later on in my talk, where I talk about the stories from the grassroots, which comes from my own fieldwork during my PhD time, and something that Ashish Nandi had also talked about, that his work has highlighted not just the history of development idea, but also the relationship between development, the state, modern science, and violence, right? So, and he also touches upon this whole rhetoric of social evolutionism, right? That the ultimate path is going to be this urban hyper-consumerist, hyper-consumerist society, which is seen as, okay, this is the face of development, right? And there is no other picture of development. And as if it is a path, it's an evolutionary path. if you're not moving ahead in this path, which means you're going backward, right? If you question that, it is a problem that you might be, perceived as someone who is not evolved, right? And therefore, given this particular thought process, given this assumption that this is the ultimate path and this is where everybody has to necessarily evolve towards, there is a lot of violence that is inflicted on people who probably are questioning it or have a different way of living or different way of looking at, let's say, nature or even time for that matter. If their understanding of time, pace is different, then there's a lot of violence that and coercion that happens in pushing them or nudging them towards the same goal, right? And there are several examples of resistance movement, and we also know the state-led atrocities that goes on in these sites, right? So social evolutionism is something that Ashish Nandi's work really highlighted, and that's something that also came up in that you also shared, that it's as if it's a linear path, but then there has been conversation on this, and the violence that is implicit, and that is something that we generally don't engage with in our conversations, right? Yes, and the next one is regarding, and this is something that definitely has been it's something that I have arrived at in my own PhD journey is this whole idea that there is a hierarchy of knowledge systems, right? And Shiv Vishwanathan had talked about cognitive justice, right? That democracy as a theory of difference has to recognize not the universal validity of science, but the plural availability of knowledges. That no form of knowledge can be forcibly museumized, and that memory and innovation intrinsically can go together, right? That let's say I am trying to revisit the past or think about, okay, how did we grow food in the past? That doesn't necessarily mean that I am anti-innovation, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that I am going back. But that's how I think human society and as individuals also we grow, that we do revisit the past and then we think about the future. And it's a constant back and forth process. I was really, and I think this concept is very relevant, the idea of cognitive justice. That unless we give space to different knowledge systems, right, there is a dominance of a particular kind of science. And it's not that any other way of doing is not logical. There is a logic, however, probably we have not put in as much effort as required to understand that particular logic. So cognitive justice and talking about violence is something that I will also revisit again when I talk about the grassroots movements and stories later in this discussion, right? We can go forward. So today's agenda, broadly three things I would want to touch upon. A is, and which is why the session is also very provocatively named the development myth, is because there are certain imaginations which are created, and then when we look at the current realities, it doesn't seem to match, right? So is the development model working is something that's a question that is there. And what are the possible fault lines, right? So there are two broad categories, right? One is the ecological fault line, and the other is the social fault line. So this is just two broad ways in which I have organized some of the important arguments to actually convince that degrowth or post-growth thinking is very relevant in the current context of the developing world, and given my experience in India. So within the ecological fault lines, the first thing being carbon inequality, right? The second is the development versus environment, the trade-off, because it's pitched as a trade-off, right? That we have to pay. It's the cost of development, right? So that is something that I would touch upon. And then, of course, green transition, which is, again, the current reality. I mean, when India cannot shy away from green transition. So we have to take mitigation measures as well as per our national commitments. So yeah, so these two broad categories, and within that there are these subheadings, and I would want to now, I have been really nudged to speak a bit faster. So yes, so that we can go to the next slide, please. Yes, so the development paradigm and the ecological limits. So when it comes to international conversations on degrowth, so what we see on the left is something that everybody agrees on, right? That there is an ecological space, and the North has to degrow, has to decrease their consumption, so that there is ecological space that is created for the developing world to grow. And that's something that we all agree on, right? Including myself, right? Including all of us here. Now, what is contentious is if you look at the ecological footprint data, right? And if you look at if you look at India's data, and what we find is we do, given our bio capacity, given our biophysical reserves, there is an ecological deficit, right? So can we go to the next slide, please? So there is an ecological deficit at the current moment, right? So even though we have a very low ecological footprint, however, as a nation, there is an ecological deficit, right? And so India's biocapacity per capita is also low, likely a symptom of the country's smaller land area compared to US and China. Now that is natural resource limit. That's an ecological limit. Which oftentimes gets overlooked, right? So the discourse typically gets carried away or gets swayed by this one fact that there is a low ecological footprint. Yes. However, what do we do about this ecological deficit? So moving forward, what I would want to we can go to the next slide. Yes, is to talk about the ecological fault lines. And the first thing is on carbon inequalities. We can go to the next. Yeah, so carbon inequality as a concept, and if you see the trend lines here, so this is basically trying to highlight that there are there's a very developed and high consumption social group within the South, and there are Souths within the global North, right? So if you look at what is contributing to carbon inequality, so it's the rich people and not the rich country. So it's not it's the difference within the nations which has become more prominent. That as it used to be earlier, it used to be difference between the nations, but right now what is contributing to carbon inequality is the difference within the nations. And in the next slide, what we have is figures for India. Just stay for 2 minutes with this particular slide, and this is something that I have found to be very convincing while teaching also, and while talking with my colleagues, is if we have an income-wise distribution of the emissions, right? So if you look at the top 10% is contributing way more than the rest of the population group, right? So the global average is 4.7. A good life probably is somewhere around 5. However, there is a section of population which is emitting way more than what the global average is. And the rest of the population, so the middle 40% is 2, the bottom 50% is 1, and then the full population it's 2.2. So it averages out at 2.2. But then if we actually dissect it and look at it income-wise, then the picture emerges as to why it is relevant to talk about degrowth and post-development, or to even have conversations around rethinking about our consumption levels and the waste that is being created in our cities, in the way we are commuting in cities, for example. A lot of these things, if you look at this, it will all start to look relevant, right? So if you look at, what is important is for the bottom 50% and the middle 40% to, of course, push up their consumption levels, their energy, consumption levels, and their energy needs must be increased, right? Because there is poverty. Poverty is a reality, of course. However, there is a top 10% population group which also needs to, bring down its consumption, so that the ecological space is a concept. If we say the North has to, give us some space, so even within the country, there has to be some, curtailment of consumption to be able to give space to the other, marginalized or the majority population in the country. Yes, we can go ahead. And therefore, I have just put this just to put the development and the environment priorities in perspective, that whatever development and justice goals that we have has to be, met within the ecological limits. And that is something that we, as per my experience, at least, we tend to miss out in our conversations in development. Yes, we can go to the next slide, please. Yes. Then comes the framing of environment versus development. Is it a trade-off? Is it real, or is it a false narrative? Now, this is something that was there in the news, and I think this is a couple of months back. And of course, news like this has become more frequent. So this is the news about 3 states that seek shrinking of eco-sensitive areas in Western Ghats. So within policy, there is conservation is a priority, development is a priority. Now, this is one state. So there are these. So Western Ghat, if you know the geography of the country, runs across multiple states, and 3 states that wherein the Western Ghats are located have asked for shrinking the eco-sensitive areas. Now, why? So that the tourism can be pushed up, or so that development work can happen. Similarly, for the Nicobar project, and then there is so Karnataka, Maharashtra, and Goa. In the next slide, what I have tried to argue, this is again a news from Goa, which was from yesterday, is for us to pause and think that beyond what level of development do we begin to prioritize the environment? If we, let's say this is, let's say there is a linear path. Let's say GDP is the only indicator, but to what extent? How much is enough? So if you see, Maharashtra and Karnataka are among the top 3 richest states in India by GDP levels, right? So it's not the poor states in the country which are also ignoring the environment. Again, that's also a very, that's also an argument that we hear, that poor people create more pressure on natural resources, and that whole argument. However, what we see here is that the nudge is coming from the rich states to also expand or to shrink the eco-sensitive area so that more development can be carried out. There was news from Kerala earlier this year. There was news from, of course, Uttarakhand. Joshimath shrinking is something that was there in the news in the past. And development work and tourism is something that is extremely notorious in creating certain experiences. I have nothing against travel, but then it's a kind of expectation, it's a kind of experience that people seek when they're traveling that can be very anti-environment, right? So again, we need to look at whether it is a trade-off or it's very convenient for us to stick to the trade-off narrative, right? In the next slide, again, is the whole energy question, right? In the past 2 years, I mean, more than that, in fact, what is observed is that the most dense forest also has very large coal reserves in this country, right? And therefore, I think a couple of years back, during the summer months, when of course the energy needs go up in the country, that is when new mine allocation was also happening in very dense forest areas. And this is out there in the public, and this is from Coal India's report, that India has enough coal, right? We don't really need new mines to be allocated, especially in dense forest areas of Chhattisgarh. However, in the news or in the popular narrative, it was that, oh, we are energy scarce, so therefore let's do more mining. However, the current mines are not running in full capacity, and of course, a lot of the clearances that are given are to mine in a particular way, which again are not implemented in the way it should be implemented. So there is. It's important that we relook at whether or not it is a real trade-off, and it will require all of us to actually engage a little bit more beyond the layer of the popular discourse. So in the next slide, again, yes, the green, and the third one that I wanted to touch upon is the priority of green transition. Very important. However, it's been widely written that green transition doesn't necessarily mean that that it will lead to lesser resources. It does not lead to dematerialization, even if it is highly efficient. And very similar, it's the same unjust processes, land dispossession, human right abuse, the very similar processes that happens in coal mines is something that is replicated, that is seen to be replicated even in green projects, right, which is there in the next slide. So even in renewable sites, it is seen that it replicates the same pattern of violence that is seen in other mines, fossil fuel mines, right? So again, the how question then becomes important. That till how long can we wait that we start, cutting down consumption or start to do things in a different way, right? And this, so the next slide, please. So with these three things, I would want to close the ecological fault lines, and then going on to the social fault lines. If you can go to the next slide, please. Yes. So whose development in the neoliberal world order? So yes, welfare is important, right? But what is the plight of labor? Like it came up in the question that we started with, right? That why is growth important? So jobs, employment, poverty alleviation, yes. But what have we seen? So a new study in the World Inequality Lab finds that the present day golden era of Indian billionaires has produced soaring income inequalities. So in India, now among the highest in the world and starker than the US, Brazil, and South Africa, the gap between India's rich and poor is now so wide that by some measures, the distribution of income in India was more equitable under British colonial rule, right? And this is from the Time magazine. So whose development are we actually talking about, and what is the plight of the labor in the economy? So in the next slide, therefore, it's important. What I've tried to do is to talk about the structural transformation, right, which is which has been peculiarly different in India. We can go to the next slide, please. Right. So what we miss out in our conversation about growth-led development path is that as we devise our policies and we structure our economy around ideas like the Lewis transformation or the Rousseau stages of growth, this path itself creates dispossession, violence, and it creates a lot of it creates a certain kind of poverty, right, which gets overlooked in our conversation of poverty elevation. So if you look at the numbers of people who have come out of poverty, of course, The numbers are fine. I mean, more people have come out of it. No questions about that. But then if you want to go and question what is poverty itself, right? If you look at the baseline and the level, the poverty line is set so low, right? That it really does not, in the everyday life of that person who has been brought, who is technically now out of poverty, what difference does it make in their lives? Are they saving enough? Can they fund any kind of the education needs of the children, or for that matter, their own health needs, for example? Given the neoliberal economic structure, because the welfare has gone down, and therefore, and the wave of privatization, what has happened is the cost of education, the cost of healthcare has gone up. So even though we are pulling up people from that very low poverty line, since there is no scope for saving that is built into that poverty line calculation. So by numbers, if people are just statistics, probably it looks fine. But then if you actually look at how has the lived reality of the person changed, then I'm sure that we would all be convinced that not much really changes if a person really just is a little bit above the poverty line. So the next slide is again taking on the jobs situation. So we need growth because we need more jobs. Now this is data from the State of Work in India report that was released by Azim Premji University in 2019, and there have been multiple versions of this report in the recent years. So if you see, as GDP has grown, it has not really translated into creation of employment. So the employment number itself is something that we expected, and that is something that's one of the arguments why we need growth. But if you actually do a reality check, in terms of the number of employment generation itself, it is not very impressive. It is not at all impressive. And going further, if you look at the nature of jobs, right? So the nature of jobs, again, is informal sector jobs or construction jobs, right? So if you look at regular wage work that has been created over the years, so then we really have to stop and think that are we even creating jobs through this growth-led development model, right? And there is enough that has been written about that, the growth story in India is a stunted structural transformation. So even though the contribution of the so-called traditional sectors to GDP has gone down, however, labor is still stuck in the traditional sector. So the labor movement has not really happened. For the first time, what has happened is India used to be perceived as a land of villages, but then the population has grown more in urban areas than the rural in the past census. That is what is highlighted. That's happened for the first time. So stunted structural transformation or tortuous transformation, stunted growth, lopsided transformation, these are the words that have been used to actually summarize the whole growth story of India and this whole and our journey in this linear path, right? Even if we're trying to evolve to this and arrive at that developed dream, there's something that has not been the same as has been seen in the industrialized or the developed nations, right? And of course, then there is something called the Lewis trap. So Asia is engaged towards the Lewis trap, where farmers are increasingly numerous and poorer compared to other workers and most of the farmers in the world. So if it is a labor question, then also we need to relook at the path and the destination of development. And in the next slide, yes, and this is from this year's news, wherein unemployment climbs with education levels in India. So this is from the ILO report, wherein it was seen that despite having higher education, graduate level of education, people, it did not really correlate with them being employed, right? So that is again something that nudges us to, think about where are we going and how are we going, right? Next slide, please. Right. And the second, so the first social fault line was about the labor question. So whose development, and then whose freedom, right? So development and democracy. Again, I'm trying to be provocative here. So development and democracy, an inverse relationship, right? If you look at, and this is data from the Environmental Justice Atlas, right? So if you look at, there are 357 cases of violence. So now I go back to what Ashish Nandi was talking about, the violence that is implicit in nudging people because we assume the social evolutionism, right? So many cases of violence that are reported in the Environmental Justice Atlas. And I will bring to you the story of two of these sites. So one is the Nyamgiri site, right, wherein the community protested against Vedanta, against one of the aluminium mining, right, in the Nyamgiri hills. So and this is definitely a win for the community. So in April 2013, the Supreme Court empowered the Dongaria Khons to have the final say in mining projects on their land and gave 12 village councils in Nyamgiri Hills the right to vote on the Vedanta mine. And by 2030, by August 2013, all the 12 tribal village councils unanimously voted against the mine. However, I mean, this is 10 years back. Of course, this was a win. And I had the opportunity to actually go and work in this particular area during my PhD time. And I must say that, a success is not an end. Again, it's a continuous process that is happening. So it's not that the Vedanta mine in Lanjigarh is not operational. It is operational as we talk today. The person here that you see who had led the Nyamgiri protests also got the Goldman Environmental Prize in 2017, and then has also been, even post that, has been subjected to all kinds of violence. So what I want to highlight from this particular field sites are a couple of things. Is what is now happening. So there was this win when the community said no mining, but then slowly, eventually, the industry is functioning. And what is happening is something that has been talked about in environmental governance as environmentality, right? So in the next slide, I would want to bring this poem by Pash, right? So and to actually talk about the hegemony of the imperialist dream. So what is happening is the welfare, of course, but the nature of welfare is such in terms of health or education, is that it changes the way people experience their ecology, the way they experience their own food, right? So as Pash said, that the most dangerous thing, and this is a translation for people who can read Hindi, can just read it in Hindi. But the most dangerous thing is when your voice and existence is silenced, when there's no unrest in the heart and all suffering is tolerated, when we are stuck in the endless cycle of going to work and returning home, when all your dreams are dead, it is the most serious thing. Now, what has happened is the way the shaping of the dream is happening in the hinterlands is a very cultural is a cultural violence that's happening, right? So so that's what I would want to highlight in the next couple of slides. We can go to the next slide, please. Is the contestation of knowledge. And what was very evident in my observation during my PhD work was the way the nature of forest and the way people connect with forest has changed. So the forest canopy, the undergrowth has completely changed, and the way the forest used to be, a repository of food. It was something that people would fall back upon in times of malnutrition or hunger, right? In times of hunger or bad produce. Now, that forest isn't giving them food anymore, because all of the forest, because of the state policy, and the way conservation is done through the state, has become timber, right? So if there is a state, if there is a capitalist, and if there is a community, their understanding of forest and their connection with forest and their use of forest is very different. And what is very evident, and what was very evident in my observation, was that there's one form of knowledge which dominates and gets included in policy making, and the other gets marginalized. So this whole productivity and efficiency driven policy versus biodiversity, and most of these plantations, of course, are not biodiverse forests again, right? So moving to the next slide, what can we do if this is the kind of contestation that is going on? Is this the kind of knowledge, discursive, and cultural contestation that goes on in these sites of violence? Is a lot of is the essential work towards food sovereignty, is to take control of the food and consumption cycle. So seed sovereignty, there's a lot of work that's happening in these sites on bringing back the traditional seeds, because to actually, if you want to do away with the hybrid seed, which comes with a particular set of fertilizers and chemical use in the soil. So if you want to revive the soil back, it's also important to bring back that diversity. So what has happened is the diversity from the farms have gone. So what you're producing is not diverse, and therefore what you're consuming is also not very diverse. And therefore comes the whole question of malnutrition and other things, and associated disease and morbidities. So these are some of the things that is going on as acts of resistance, right? As strategies to bring back the ecology and bring back the cultural pride in people about their food, about their knowledge, about nature, about forest, right? So yeah, we can go to the next slide, please. And the other site is the Hasdeo site, which is a more recent one. And Hasdeo is where I just spoke about a couple of slides before, is where the coal mine and the dense forest is. And this is very obvious violence, state-led violence that is happening. People, as we talk, people are trying to protect the felling of trees. And there is police deployment on people who are trying to protect the forest. And this is despite, the Gram Sabha actively saying no to the mines, right? So this is Hasdeo, and as it's written, it's notorious. It's the first case in which rights were granted under the Forest Rights Act to the indigenous people, and then were taken away. And then there has been a lot of struggle that has happened and is also currently going on. A big win for Hasdeo, in the next slide, please, is again the recognition that the movement has got internationally, wherein with the help of constitutional and policy spaces of organizing resistance, the movement has actually secured, has been able to stop mine allocation in the past. And also the major triumph was the government established an elephant reserve. Of course, there are questions of including the community in here. However, this could also be seen as a win for the ecology, right? So, and Alok Shukla got the Goldman Environmental Prize this year in 2024, right? So that is again the strategy, that one of the winning strategies in one of these sites of resistance. In the next slide, please. Yes. Now, and I'm going towards the last part of the presentation. I don't think I have much time because I am lost track of the multiple messages that are popping up. So this is a thought for all of us to stay with and probably think about after the webinar and maybe later on as well, that ending poverty and environmental catastrophe demands fresh thinking. So of course, there's a lot of case study and a lot of work and documentation of alternative worldviews, alternative organization that, of course, Vikas Sangam as an organization is doing. And in the next slide, I would also want to highlight how the framing of poverty itself, not just this income led, and that to a very low baseline of income. How do we rephrase and reframe poverty in terms of, what is enough, right? When will we begin to talk about poverty of speech, poverty of social capital, poverty of power, leisure, life choices, physical and emotional well-being, autonomous movement, time poverty, of course, is something that we just don't talk about. So yeah, and the next slide, and this is, of course, the work that is currently exciting me is about thinking about alternatives. So FRA, the Forest Right Act, is something that has been immensely helpful in empowering and giving autonomy to the community over the forest resources, right? However, it's a constant struggle. So whatever successes that we see is again a part of a longer journey, because it's a big discursive struggle. There's a huge dominant thought process that needs to be countered. So it's important that we highlight the successes, the small successes, but it's also important to not stop there. So this is from the story of one of the sites in Himachal where a very large forest got community forest rights. The community got the forest rights, and they are still struggling to envision their future. They're struggling currently to get timber rights and autonomy over the other forest resources. So this is about through FRA. If that's one way of organizing resistance. Talking about post-development, building alternatives. And the other thing that I have found to be very interesting, in the next slide, please, is about the idea of post-growth business and post-growth business organizations and entrepreneurship. And I am trying to bring that in my research and teaching. And in the next slide, I bring to you one example of a coffee product, which I feel is very radically, it has tried to radically reshape the relations between capital and labor and ecology, right? Is the way they grow, the way they consume, and the way the ownership structure of this particular organization is. And of course, there are aspects of scale also, how much to grow, because in the entrepreneurship world, again, that's a big that's a conversation that can take another session, so I won't go into that. But the founder here has consciously also taken a call on what should be the scale of my organization. So yeah, these are some of the examples. So this is the Black Bazaar coffee that I have just that I just brought to you. And yeah, with this, we end in the last slide is just some food for thought. And I want to end on this note that we need to move beyond cliches, this whole idea that whether this is capitalism, whether this is socialism, or whether this is tradition, or whether this is modernity, this whole binary way of thinking is actually not a good way of moving forward, because there are multiple worldviews. It is in the lived reality that we have reaped the benefits of some of the growth led interventions. However, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have its own limitations, right? So I found this very interesting that in India, in the 21st century, Lewis and Kuznets, that's the that is actually the dominant economic development thought is driven by these two models of growth and development have to meet the Ambedkar and Gandhi, right? And I bring to you a few lines which I have penned down. I have written from my own, struggles and experience of the merits and demerits of capitalism, and of course, I would want to just leave you with this writing, and if we have some time, then we can of course have a conversation. But I really thank you for being so patient, and yes, we can have the floor open now. Thank you so much, Akshay, for sharing slides.
Thank you so much, Vandana. We have about 5-10 minutes left. So if anybody has any questions or feedback or comment, that would be time to bring them up.
Is there something on the chat that you can probably read, and we could see if that is something to be discussed?
Akshay, I actually lost my chat. Can you see if there? I think there were a few questions there.
Yeah, I'm just checking the chat right now.
Yeah, now I can see the chat.
How do we define and measure growth according to you from this perspective by Ravi?
Question, understand what growth is.
Yeah, how will we define? And then there is question by Angela. Would someone be able to reinstate why there is an ecological deficit? I couldn't understand that.
Yeah, so the ecological, I mean, maybe I can just address that, because that might take a little bit more time. So the ecological deficit is a calculation. The math of it is that it looks at the biophysical reserve and the population and the needs of the population. So there is a deficit because the biophysical limits of the country is also is something that needs to be factored in. So given the ecological resources that we have, the land area and stuff like that, the forest. So given the natural constraints, the ecological deficit is being created. Right. So, and that is something that we miss out when we look at the ecological footprint, because the per capita is definitely low. But what we miss out is the limits within which, again, we have to meet our development goals. And regarding the growth question, how do we define and measure growth? Of course, there's been anything that goes beyond the GDP is a good start. Right? There are growth, there are measurement metrics, there is happiness index, there is human development index, and of course it can go on to thinking about it philosophically as to what is a good life, what is enough, what is the maximum salary. I don't think we have that conversation ever. How much consumption is enough? Because there's a deep anxiety that sets in young people who have seen or heard about poverty. So there's a lot of anxiety that sets in, and therefore we keep looking at, we build our aspirations around it. So we really don't have a conversation on what is enough, right? So yeah, any indicator, any index that pushes us to think beyond GDP to start with, and of course it can be it can go up to philosophical and spiritual conversations. Yes.
Ravi is asking how your interaction with the governments have been at any level. Has there been any official response to this kind of thinking on development?
Well, to be honest, Ravi, I have never had a post-development thought interaction with a government. My government interaction has been with the forest officials during my interview, during my PhD work, and I'm sure you would agree that this is something that will not be very welcomed when it comes to what I also, now having said that, What is important is there is something that there is a entry point that I now see, and that could be a ray of hope for us if we want to engage with the government. Is the sustainability question, right? Is the kind of ecological or the environmental problems that we currently deal with. Let's say air pollution could be an entry point to talk about, how to address or bring down, or to talk about transportation, for example. That could be that I think is a very convincing entry point to talk to government officials at any level. So yeah, sustainability is giving us that it's opening up that space for us to call to. We may not call it degrowth for, of course, for political reasons. We may not call it post-development, but of course, we'll have to therefore develop strategies as to how can we, enter or nudge people towards this discussion. And I think sustainability opens up that space for us. Pollution, waste is a big problem in cities. Water is a big problem. So yeah, those are some entry points, potential entry points.
I have a question about not engaging with the government, but more slightly less hostile audience, which is mainly I have worked with trade unions, teachers, health workers, right? And
Right.
for them, this concept of degrowth seems bit threatening, because in third world, especially, you are trying to grow, right, as a health sector and as a
Right.
education sector,
Right.
and
Right.
I don't personally was not convinced where right now where we have reached is where we want to tax the billionaires and get that revenue in
Right.
the government treasury, and then but then you're again dependent on GDP for billionaire wealth to grow to fund your school, right?
Right.
So that's why I got interested in degrowth. So what your messaging would be for those kind of audiences?
So this is something that I faced when I was working, when I was doing my field work and working with engaging with the communities. And I didn't really have an answer how to talk about questioning the development path to people who are actually living in poverty, right? Who are actually seeing the change in forest or food in their farming systems and everything. And there is a poverty of power also, right? So it's not just income, the poverty in terms of income, but there is a poverty in terms of power also. How much can they go and contest? Like, let's say there is a plantation work that's happening in the forest around your villages, and it is compensated, then of course probably the villagers are going to take it. Or the wave, or the gradual influence that was happening where I was engaging in my fieldwork was the influence of cotton or monocultures, right? Large tracts of land, large tracts of biodiverse farms. These were diverse farms till the recent past, growing oil seeds, flowers, lots of stuff. And they were, slightly because of the policy interventions, the welfare interventions, nudged towards either growing just one kind of paddy or cotton, right? And we know what happens when cotton grows, right? And they have felt it. They have felt it. They have seen the change in the nature and texture of soil, right? But that is the poverty of power that we don't really engage with. So we will think that these communities are poor. So how do we talk about it? But let's say we start engaging in terms of poverty of power and have a conversation with the communities. What about your knowledge systems? What is going on? There was a different way. So the farmers there explained the logic of diverse farms, right? But where is the space? So I think when it comes to engaging with communities like that, I think the cultural reviving of the cultural pride and is something that can be an entry point of conversation there.
Last
Right?
question from
Yes.
Shipra. She's talking about Odisha, which is eastern Indian state for those who are not from India. The government is quasi-communist, at least till last year. I think she means a lot of welfareist measures by the state government there. Has there been there any politician open to post-development thinking in Odisha or India, according to you?
I am not really sure there are political leaders who are very pro post development. The Orissa, at least from given that this was very much relevant for my PhD work, it did push the revival of millets, which was the traditional food in Adivasi areas, right? But again, the question was of how they are reviving the millets. So again, millets are also revived in monocultures, and that is not how it was grown. So yeah, so it's like one step forward and then two step back. So I am not sure if there is if it has a lot of political teeth right now in the country. I don't really see. I'm not that kind of optimism isn't there. But yeah, maybe who knows in future if we build this kind of awareness, and we need to keep continuing doing our work in whichever capacities that we are. So
We will take last question, sorry to interrupt, from Rameshwaram, if I'm pronouncing it right, and then we will start with the vote of thanks. Yes, Rameshwaram.
Yeah, sure, Akshay. So actually, I'm Lucknow, and I'm from another program which is actually focused on sustainable management.
right,
When actually Vandana brought in these are very much the kind of classroom discussions actually we have over here.
right,
And when you brought in the actual idea how degrowth is actually getting implemented, and that is what not exactly, but sustainability is something that we are the kind of roles we are looking for in many organizations as well.
right.
Yeah. So one thing, recently I had visited Netherlands as well, and one thing I realized was the kind of civic sense this kind of population has among them. I mean, there were movements like 20, 30 years ago when people were reclaiming spaces on the streets. They wanted to walk and ride the bicycles.
Right.
So, how can similar civic sense be built in India? So, maybe if you could share if you know anything.
Well, I think then, the conversation will go towards building institutions, and institutions, not just the legal and economic institution, but social and cultural institutions. Trust is an important aspect. What is very high in countries like Netherlands or in Northern or in Nordic countries is the trust they have on the government, right? And which is why the civic sense is very high. The respect for public space is very high in countries in those countries, and that is something that I feel is lacking. So let's say we want to have a safe public space, or at least space where you can bike or you can walk. I don't think we have designed our cities like that. I mean, I don't see cycling tracks or even parks which are safe to, so for example, where I am speaking to you from, there is a highway right outside the university, and sometimes I feel if I go on a bicycle, probably a big SUV will come and run over me, right? Or if I am trying to walk to the campus, and literally this is no distance, people need to walk this much, and yet there are so many cars. So even if at the ideal level, but we would want to follow certain practices as an individual, but the structural compulsions are such that you don't feel safe to ride a bicycle, let's say, or we don't have tracks. So these are things that probably as citizens we'll have to start asking the government to create spaces. Maybe we can start through our own classrooms and nudge our students, make our students more aware, and the young population, when they ask, it definitely gets more attention. So yeah, we have to first create that infrastructure and the trust. Otherwise, it's very difficult. I mean, it's very easy right now to blame individuals to, either litter or use a car, but there are structural compulsions, especially in the context where you and I are embedded and we are speaking from. I mean, we know that it's very difficult. It would be unfair actually to compare our situation with Netherlands, because there's also very long history. Institutions take very long time to build, and of course we're not there. But I mean, my only hope is that through our education, through our whatever we do in our classrooms, through that we can nudge people to ask for certain things from the government, right? To build a certain infrastructure. So that's the only site of resistance and strategize. So yeah, sustainability education is very important, I feel.
Yeah.
It's a very
Thanks for
long and slow
taking the approach.
process.
Yeah.
But yes.
Over to Kanika for
Thank you so
closing
much, Rameshwar.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. We are now at the end of today's session, and I would like to thank everyone who joined us today. Thank you, Vandana, for sharing such critical insights and giving us your valuable time. And thank you for everyone who asked questions and participated in the discussion. It was really, uh, you know, vibrant. And I would also like to thank Akshay, Aya, and Joel, and for helping us organize this session. We will be sending the recording to you all over with a follow-up email, also the Mentimeter results, and we will also be hosting such talks more in the future in the coming months. So please make sure to connect with us on Instagram or LinkedIn, or if you're too keen, you can also join the IDN. You can find more about us on degrowth.net. And yeah, with that, thank you everybody, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.